The evening sky over Chicago looked calm, but inside Ava Johnson's small apartment, her mind was far from calm. She had just received a message from a dating agency saying she had been matched with someone for a blind date. At first, she thought it was a mistake. She had signed up on the site months ago, mostly because her old colleague Clara had encouraged her to, but she never took it seriously. Now there it was, a message asking her to meet someone at the Blue Orchid, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Ava sat on her small couch reading the message again. Her phone buzzed with another text from Clara. "You should go," it read. "You've worked too hard lately. You deserve some fun." Ava smiled a little, not knowing that this message came from a woman who wanted to destroy her. Clara had always been two-faced. She used to be Ava's senior at their old company, but when Clara made a mistake that cost the company a big contract, Ava was the one who found and fixed it. Instead of thanking her, Clara turned bitter and jealous. When she was later fired, she blamed Ava for everything. Ava didn't know any of that. She thought Clara had moved on. She looked at the message again and sighed. "What's the worst that could happen?" she whispered. She needed a break. Something to distract her from her long days behind the computer screen. By 6:30, she was standing in front of her mirror. She wore a simple navy blue gown that hugged her figure gently. Her hair was neatly tied back, her skin glowed softly, and her makeup was natural. She didn't wear any jewelry except for a small silver bracelet her late mother gave her. She took a deep breath and whispered to her reflection, "You're enough." Outside, she hailed a cab and watched the streets roll by. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she thought about how strange this was. A blind date in such an expensive place. She hoped whoever it was would be polite. She didn't expect anything romantic. She just wanted to have a decent evening. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan Cole sat in the back seat of his black car, checking his watch. He was a billionaire, the CEO of Cole Technologies, known for his sharp decisions and cold personality. He didn't like surprises, and he didn't like wasting time. His assistant had told him about the blind date as part of a high-end matchmaking arrangement for elite singles. He expected to meet someone from his circle, maybe a businesswoman or investor, not a stranger. Still, he agreed to it because his business partner wouldn't stop insisting he should meet someone serious. When he arrived at the Blue Orchid, the waiter led him to a private table near the window. The restaurant glowed with gold lights, soft music played in the background, and the smell of expensive wine filled the air. He looked at his watch again, impatient. Ava walked in a few minutes later, her calm steps echoing softly on the marble floor. The waiter smiled and guided her to the table where Ethan was sitting. When Ethan looked up, his expression changed instantly. He was expecting someone dressed in luxury, maybe covered in diamonds, not a simple woman in a plain dress. He gave a polite smile, but his eyes revealed disappointment. He stood and shook her hand briefly, then sat down quickly, checking his watch again. Ava noticed. She had seen that look before, the same one people gave her in meetings before realizing she was smarter than they thought. She didn't take offense. She simply smiled and said, "You seem disappointed. Should I give you 5 minutes to reset your expectations?" Ethan's eyes widened a little. He wasn't used to people talking to him like that. For the first time that evening, he smiled genuinely. "You're very direct," he said. "Only when people underestimate me before saying a word," she replied calmly. The waiter brought water and menus, and for a moment they sat in silence. Ethan decided to start with small talk. "So, what do you do?" he asked. "I'm a data analyst," Ava said. "I work with companies to help them understand their performance and correct mistakes before they become problems." Ethan raised his brow. "That sounds serious." "It is sometimes," she said, smiling. "But I enjoy it. I like finding answers that others miss." Ethan nodded slowly. He was starting to notice her confidence. Still, part of him wanted to test her. "You follow market trends, I assume," he said. "Yes," she replied. "What's your view on the recent tech stock drop?" he asked, watching her carefully. Ava looked thoughtful. "It's not a crash, it's a correction. People are too emotional when it comes to investments. Logic builds a company, but emotion destroys it faster. Ethan leaned back slightly, surprised by her answer. Interesting, he said softly. She tilted her head. Your turn, she said. You're clearly someone who knows the business world well. What's your view on success, money, or impact? He gave a short laugh. Both, ideally. Profit keeps a company alive, she said gently, but impact keeps it remembered. Ethan stared at her for a moment, caught between surprise and admiration. You don't talk like someone I expected to meet on a blind date, he said finally. I could say the same, she replied, smiling. For the first time that night, Ethan laughed quietly. He began to relax, and the conversation became smoother. He asked her more about her work, and she explained how data could reveal the truth behind a company's success or failure. When he mentioned a few of his projects, she asked him sharp questions that made him think. So, she said, you run Cole Technologies, right? He nodded. I read about your last merger. It didn't go as planned. What do you think went wrong? He looked surprised. You follow my company? I read a lot, she said simply. You'd be shocked how much public information tells the story people try to hide. He chuckled lightly. Maybe I should hire you. Maybe, she said. While they spoke, at a corner table, Tom, the cameraman hired by Clara, adjusted his small hidden lens and kept recording. He whispered into his phone, This is going better than expected. Wait till she says something embarrassing. He had no idea that one of Ethan's security officers had already noticed his strange behavior. The man's calm eyes kept watching from across the room. Back at the table, Ethan said, I'm dealing with a problem right now at work, a merger proposal that's failing. The numbers don't make sense, even though everything looks fine on paper. Ava looked interested. Maybe the problem isn't in the data, she said. Maybe it's in the people reading it. He smiled faintly. You think so? I know so, she said. At that moment, Ethan's security officer moved quietly toward Tom, who was still filming. The tension in the room began to grow. Ethan noticed the man's movement but kept his focus on Ava, unaware that the next few minutes would change everything. Ava continued speaking calmly. You know, sometimes companies fail not because of poor systems, but because people at the top forget to listen. Ethan leaned closer, listening deeply, his earlier pride slowly fading. Ava didn't know it yet, but she had just made one of the most powerful men in Chicago see her differently. The night wasn't over, and neither was the plan that had been set to humiliate her. Something was about to unfold, something that would reveal who had been watching all along. The lights in the restaurant glowed softly as the night deepened. Ava sat across from Ethan, completely unaware that a camera lens was pointed at her from the far corner. She didn't know that every smile, every word, and every small movement was being recorded for someone else's cruel entertainment. Ethan, on the other hand, was beginning to forget his earlier judgment. He leaned in as she spoke, his usual arrogance replaced by curiosity. So, tell me, Ethan said with a small smile, if you were in my position, running a company of thousands, what would you do differently? Ava took a sip of her water, her eyes steady on him. I'd start by listening more and talking less. Data is honest, but people aren't. When employees feel unseen, they hide their mistakes. That's when a company begins to sink. Ethan nodded slowly. He had expected this date to be boring or awkward, but this woman was different. Every sentence she spoke carried meaning. Her words didn't try to impress him, they simply made sense. He smiled faintly and said, You talk like someone who has managed big corporations. I haven't, Ava said with a calm voice. But I've studied enough patterns to know that the size of a company doesn't change human nature. It just magnifies it. Ethan chuckled quietly. You're confident. I have to be, she replied softly. People listen better when you sound sure of yourself. He watched her carefully. There was something rare about her calmness. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth or his status. If anything, she seemed more at ease the more he tried to test her. At the corner, the cameraman Tom whispered into his phone again. She's too confident. The clip won't be funny if she doesn't break. Maybe get Clara to send a question to make her stumble. Ethan's security officer, Miles, was now certain something was wrong. He had noticed Tom's odd hand movements, the tiny glint on his shirt button, and how his eyes never left the couple. Miles moved closer, his hand near his earpiece, pretending to check his watch while signaling the restaurant's internal security. Back at the table, Ethan crossed his arms. You said earlier that emotion moves markets faster than logic. I've seen that happen in business. But don't you think it's unavoidable? Ava smiled gently. It's not unavoidable. It's just not managed properly. If a leader stays calm, his team follows. When panic starts from the top, it spreads like fire. Ethan nodded again, almost impressed by how simple but true her words sounded. He wanted to argue, but couldn't find a reason to. Then Ava leaned slightly forward and said, "Can I ask you something now?" He raised a brow. "Go ahead." "What made you choose the tech industry?" she asked. He looked surprised. "That's not what I expected you to ask." "I don't like shallow questions," she said, smiling. He looked away for a second, then back at her. "Honestly, I liked control. Tech gives you control over systems, data, and people's access to information. It's predictable." Ava tilted her head, thinking for a moment. "So you build machines to control people's unpredictability?" Ethan smiled slightly. "I build systems that prevent chaos. Or maybe," she said quietly, "you just avoid chaos because you can't control it." He stared at her. No one had ever spoken to him like that. He didn't know whether to feel offended or fascinated. At that moment, a loud voice broke the soft rhythm of their conversation. "Sir, excuse me," Miles said as he approached the corner table. The people nearby turned to look. He stood beside Tom, his tone calm but firm. "Can I see what's under your jacket?" Tom froze. "What? Why?" "Because I said so," Miles replied, reaching down quickly and pulling out a small camera from Tom's shirt button. Gasps filled the restaurant. Ethan stood immediately, his chair scraping the floor. "What is going on?" Ethan demanded. Miles held up the camera. "This man has been recording you and your guests since you arrived." Ethan's face hardened. "Who sent you?" Tom tried to pull away, but Miles grabbed his arm tightly. "Speak," Ethan ordered. "It wasn't my idea," Tom stammered. "A woman paid me to do it. Her name is Clara Brooks. She said to record the woman with you." Ava's stomach turned as soon as she heard the name. Her fingers tightened on her napkin. "Clara," she whispered. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You know her?" Ava nodded slowly. "She was my former colleague. She hates me because I exposed her mistake that cost our company a contract. She swore she'd get back at me one day." Ethan took a deep breath, his anger quiet but heavy. "And she thought humiliating you would make her feel powerful." Tom struggled again, but Miles didn't move an inch. The restaurant manager appeared, and Ethan said firmly, "Call the police." Within minutes, 2 officers entered the restaurant. They questioned Tom briefly, took the device, and led him out. The quiet returned, but the atmosphere was heavy. Ethan sat down again, running his fingers through his hair. "I can't believe people do this," he said quietly. Ava's voice was calm. "Some people don't want peace. They want reactions." He looked at her, guilt flashing across his face. "I owe you an apology. I judged you before you even spoke. I thought this date would be a waste of my time, but I was wrong." Ava smiled faintly. "You didn't know me. I can't blame you for that. But I can blame you if you don't learn from it." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "Fair enough." The waiter, trying to lighten the mood, came over with their dessert. Ava thanked him politely and took a small bite. Ethan barely touched his. He kept watching her with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "You said something earlier," Ethan said, "that sometimes the problem isn't in the data, but in the people reading it. That struck me. My company is facing a situation like that right now. A merger proposal that looks right on paper, but feels wrong in the numbers." Ava looked thoughtful. "Can I see the data?" He blinked. "You'd actually look at it?" "Why not?" she asked. "You said it yourself. The numbers don't make sense. Maybe you're reading them through stress, not clarity." Ethan smiled slightly. "You really believe logic can fix everything, don't you?" "Not everything," Ava said softly. "But it's a good start." He leaned back, studying her face. "All right, come by my office tomorrow at 10. I want to hear your perspective. If you can find what my team missed, I'll owe you dinner this time. without hidden cameras. Ava chuckled quietly. You don't owe me dinner, just honesty. Ethan nodded slowly. You have my word. They stood to leave. The restaurant was quieter now, the soft music returning to its rhythm. Outside, the city lights reflected on the glass doors as they walked out together. Ethan's driver pulled up, and he turned to her before stepping into the car. Thank you, he said simply. For tonight? Ava smiled. I'll see you tomorrow. As his car disappeared into the busy road, Ava took a deep breath. She felt both drained and strong at the same time. What was meant to humiliate her had turned into something completely different. At that same moment, somewhere across town, Clara Brooks threw her phone against the wall after hearing that her cameraman had been arrested. Her plan had failed, and she didn't know that the story she tried to destroy would soon go viral for the very opposite reason. The night had ended in Ava's favor, but something else was waiting for her the next morning, inside the glass walls of Cole Technologies. It came fast. Sun glowed softly through the wide glass walls of Cole Technologies. Employees walked quickly through the halls carrying files, greeting one another, and whispering about the rumor that their billionaire boss was bringing a woman to the board meeting. No one knew who she was, but everyone was curious. Some said she was a consultant, others said she was the mysterious lady from the news that helped him at dinner last night. Ava stepped out of the elevator and paused in front of the large glass doors that led to the conference room. She wore a plain cream blouse and a dark skirt, her hair neatly tied back. She looked calm, but her heart was beating faster than usual. This was not her usual workspace. She had spent years analyzing data alone in her small office, not in a skyscraper surrounded by top executives. Ethan stood near the long table when she entered. His eyes softened when he saw her. You made it, he said quietly. I said I would, she replied, smiling. He turned to the team seated around the table. Everyone, this is Ava Johnson. She's here to help us review the merger analytics. I want everyone to listen to her carefully. The executives exchanged glances. Some looked doubtful, others politely smiled, unsure why their CEO trusted an outsider. Ava noticed but said nothing. She placed her small folder on the table, opened her laptop, and looked at the large screen where graphs and reports were displayed. Ethan began. Our company has been trying to merge with another firm for 3 months now, but the numbers keep showing imbalance. The revenue projections and expense reports don't align. Ava nodded and took a closer look at the figures. For several minutes, she read silently while the room waited. Her eyes moved from one chart to another. Then she spoke. You've been comparing 2 different data sources, she said calmly. One of the senior analysts frowned. That can't be true. We cross-checked everything. Ava pointed to a chart. Your internal report uses the old cost model, but the new proposal is based on post-merger tax regulations. The formula is still reading the outdated data. The room went quiet. Ethan leaned forward, interested. Show us what you mean. Ava walked to the big screen, took the marker, and began explaining each step clearly. She didn't sound like she was trying to impress anyone. Her tone was patient and sure. She explained how one miscalculated ratio created a chain reaction that made the whole proposal look unbalanced. The executives listened closely, and even the skeptical ones began to nod. When she finished, she turned back to them and said, The data wasn't wrong, the reader was. Ethan looked at her for a long second and said quietly, That's exactly what you told me last night. A small smile crossed her lips. I did. The lead analyst sighed. She's right. The merge team has been using the wrong computation model. Ethan looked at his board members. Correct it immediately, and make sure she gets the recognition she deserves. Ava shook her head. I don't need recognition, just accuracy. That's enough for me. The meeting went on for another hour. Every question asked, Ava answered with calm clarity. When it finally ended, the entire team clapped softly. Ethan stood and extended his hand to her. You just saved this company millions. Ava smiled modestly. I only did what I was asked to do. As they left the room, Ethan walked beside her. You know, he said, I was wrong about you. When I first saw you last night, I judged you before you spoke. I thought you weren't worth my time." Ava looked straight ahead. "I noticed," she said gently. He stopped walking for a moment. "How did you manage to stay so calm after what happened at the restaurant?" She looked at him. "Because I've learned that when people try to embarrass you, silence embarrasses them more. I don't fight with noise." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes filled with respect. "That's powerful." They reached the lobby, and the staff greeted Ethan politely as they passed. Outside, the morning breeze was cool and fresh. Ethan turned to her again. "You said something else last night. You said you came prepared, not to impress, but to stay grounded. That stuck with me." Ava smiled faintly. "I've seen too many people lose themselves trying to look important. I don't need to prove my worth. I just need to live it." He smiled. "You already have." A few hours later, news spread about what had happened during the blind date the night before. Someone at the restaurant had leaked a small clip showing how Ava stayed calm when the cameraman was caught. Instead of humiliation, the internet saw strength. Thousands of comments poured in, calling her the woman who handled disrespect with grace. Clara Brooks watched the clip in disbelief from her apartment. Her plan to humiliate Ava had backfired completely. She threw her phone aside, her face pale with anger. The police had questioned her earlier that morning, and now her name was trending online for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, Ethan invited Ava to his office later that evening. When she arrived, he offered her a seat and said, "My company could use someone like you. You don't just read data, you read people. Would you consider joining my team as a consultant?" Ava looked thoughtful. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I want to work under you." He smiled slightly. "Then work with me." She laughed softly. "That sounds better." He leaned forward. "I mean it. I want you to help us build something meaningful. Maybe a new branch that focuses on training young analysts, especially women, to enter this field. You'd have full control." Her eyes softened. "That's something I could say yes to." Over the next few weeks, Ava began working with Ethan's company as a partner consultant. Together, they created a small department that offered scholarships and training for women in data and technology. The project grew quickly and began attracting attention from other organizations. During one of their meetings, Ethan looked at her and said, "You turned what was supposed to be a joke into a movement." Ava smiled quietly. "That's what happens when people underestimate the wrong person." Months passed, and the foundation they built became one of the most respected in the industry. Ethan often found himself relying on Ava's insight more than anyone else's. He admired not just her intelligence, but the peace she carried within her. One evening, they attended a charity event together. Reporters asked questions about their partnership. A journalist said to Ava, "Many people look up to you after what happened that night. What message do you want to give to others who face humiliation?" Ava took the microphone and spoke softly, but clearly. "Don't fight for validation. Fight for growth. When people try to bring you down, don't bend to their noise. Just come prepared, stay calm, and let your results speak for you." The audience clapped, and even Ethan smiled proudly beside her. Later that night, as they stood outside the hall, he said quietly, "You know, I've met many brilliant people in my life, but none have taught me as much as you did in 2 days." Ava looked at him and said, "You just needed someone to remind you that power without humility is weakness." He nodded. "And you reminded me." They stood there in silence for a moment, the city lights shimmering around them. Ava looked up at the night sky and said softly, "Funny how something that began as a setup turned into a new beginning." Ethan smiled. "Sometimes life tests us with humiliation to introduce us to people who can change us." She turned to him, her eyes calm. "Maybe it was never a setup, maybe it was just direction." As they both laughed quietly, a cool wind passed through, carrying the soft sound of the city below. From that day forward, Ava Johnson became more than the woman who handled humiliation with grace. She became a symbol of strength, a reminder that dignity has more power than wealth, and that calm intelligence can silence any crowd. Her voice closed the story gently, like a message carried on the wind. "They wanted to record my weakness, but they captured my strength. They wanted me to fall, but I came prepared. Not with anger, not with pride, but with peace. Because sometimes the best revenge is proving that you never needed to fight to win. And with that, Ava walked away from the noise of the world she had quietly conquered, leaving behind a story that would be remembered by everyone who had once looked down on her.